Welcome to Sci-Fi Travelers, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Theodore and the alien vampire woman Nova. Welcome to the world of science fiction. If you're ready, let's dive into this amazing story. Enjoy the show. I was poisoned and on the verge of death. I survived thanks to the bite of an alien vampire woman. The twin sons of Veyra were dying the way old men tell stories, slowly, gloriously, and with absolutely no concern for anyone else's schedule. Theodore watched them bleed amber and rose across the glass desert from the cockpit of the marginal prophet, and decided, not for the first time, that beautiful places were where people went to make terrible decisions. Atmospheric integrity at 62%, said Merritt, the ship's AI, in the tone of a butler announcing that the house was on fire but the wine had survived. Which is coincidentally the same percentage of this plan I calculate to be functional. The plan is fine. Theodore checked the charge on his cutter and holstered it. Land, walk in, grab whatever the pre-collapse Veyrans left lying around, walk out. Sell it to Madame Osk on Trell Station. Pay off Grigor before he sells my kidneys to a biofarm. Ah yes, the plan where you enter a temple that 3 previous salvage crews entered and did not exit. 2 crews. The third stopped transmitting mid-scream, which I generously logged as inconclusive. The ship settled onto the glass with a sound like a spoon dragged across a frozen lake. Theodore stepped down into heat that had texture, that leaned on his shoulders like a drunk friend. Veyra's gravity hiccuped, a brief lurch, as though the planet had forgotten how heavy things were supposed to be, and somewhere in the crystalline scrub, a plant hissed at him. He hissed back. It seemed important to establish dominance early. The temple of SSD Heron rose out of the desert like the ribcage of something that had died mid-prayer. Spires of black stone, veined with mineral that caught the dying sunlight and held it, glowing faintly long after the beam had moved on, as if the temple hoarded light the way misers hoarded coin. The entrance was a wound in the stone, tall and narrow, breathing out cold air that smelled of dust and copper and something older, the smell of rooms that had been holding their breath for 1,000 years. Last chance to reconsider, Merritt murmured in his earpiece. I could fake an engine failure. We could go somewhere nice, somewhere with fewer screaming-based fatalities. Grigor doesn't accept somewhere nice as currency. Theodore clicked on his shoulder lamp and stepped inside. The dark swallowed him politely. His light carved a pale tunnel through it, sliding over walls carved with figures, tall, slender beings with long, sweeping ears and eyes rendered in inlaid stones that still, impossibly, gleamed violet. Thousands of them, marching in processions, kneeling, dancing, drinking from vessels held to one another's throats. Theodore paused at that last one and decided archaeology was a discipline he was happy to leave to people with better stomachs. The corridor descended. His boots stirred dust that hadn't been disturbed since before his species had invented the wheel, which gave him a brief, dizzy feeling of trespass, the sense of walking through someone else's memory. The mineral veins in the walls brightened faintly as he passed, then dimmed behind him, and he tried very hard to believe that was a natural phenomenon and not the architectural equivalent of a cat watching a mouse. Picking up a chamber ahead, Merritt said. Large, metallic signatures. Also, my sensors keep insisting there's a heartbeat down there, which is absurd, so I've decided it's an echo of yours. Comforting. I thought so. The chamber opened around him like a held breath released. His lamp found the ceiling and gave up halfway. At the center stood an altar of black glass, and upon it, arranged with the tenderness of grave goods, lay the salvage of dreams. Instruments of silver alloy, sealed vessels, a diadem set with stones that drank his light and returned it violet. Theodore's debts began composing their own farewell speeches. Careful, Merritt warned. Structures like this tend to have. Theodore lifted the diadem. Defenses. The click was very small. That was the insulting part, he'd think later, that the sound which ended his life was smaller than a snapped twig. Something kissed the side of his neck, delicate as an insect. He slapped at it and his fingers came away holding a needle thinner than a hair, its tip dark with something that glistened. Merit. His voice came out strange. Run a toxin scan. A pause. AIs were not supposed to pause. Theodore, I'm reading Vashkar venom. Concentrated. The database calls it the long goodbye. Estimated time to systemic failure is 41 minutes. Would you like me to draft a will, or shall we keep pretending you own anything? The burning started at his throat and unspooled downward, silver fire threading through his veins, and his knees introduced themselves to the ancient floor. The diadem rolled from his fingers, chiming against the stone like a small, indifferent bell. His vision began its slow retreat from the edges inward, the darkness closing like curtains at the end of a very disappointing play. And then the darkness moved. She stepped out of it as though the shadow were a doorway she had always owned, tall, impossibly graceful, skin the violet of dusk before storms, long ears sweeping back like a crown. Her eyes found his, glowing twin moons rising over the wreck of him. Theodore, dying, managed a smile. "Oh good," he whispered. "An audience." She crossed the chamber without seeming to touch the floor, and the mineral veins in the walls flared bright as she passed, greeting her the way old houses greet their owners. Up close she was worse for his concentration, which was already losing a war against the venom. Her long ears tilted forward, reading him the way his instruments read wreckage. "Human," she said. Her voice had layers, like a chord played on an instrument built for grief. "You are dying." "I'm aware." The silver fire had reached his chest now, and each breath came wrapped in barbed wire. "I don't suppose you have an antidote in that." He gestured weakly at her robes, dark and fluid as spilled ink, very dramatic outfit. "There is no antidote to Vashkar." She knelt beside him, and the cold radiating from her skin was almost a mercy. "There is only the length of the suffering. Yours will be long. The venom keeps the mind awake while it unmakes the body. It is a cruel death." "Fantastic. 5 stars. Would visit this temple again." Something moved behind her glowing eyes, surprise, perhaps, that a dying thing was still making noise. "You are strange," she said. "Most beg. Give me 20 minutes, I'll get there." She studied him for a long moment, and Theodore had the distinct sensation of being weighed by something that had weighed centuries. "I can end it," she said quietly, quickly, without pain. "It is the only gift I have for your kind. My bite is death to off-worlders, but a kind death. A closing door, not a burning house." "Merit," Theodore croaked into his earpiece, "the beautiful temple lady is offering to kill me as a favor. Thoughts?" "Statistically," Merit said, "it's the best offer you've received all year." The venom chose that moment to reach his spine, and the world went white with pain, and when it receded he found he had made a sound he wasn't proud of. Her cool hand was on his jaw, steadying him. Her ears had swept back flat distress, he'd learned later, though at the time he only thought, even her pity is elegant. "Do it," he whispered. "But for the record, this is the worst first date I've ever been on." "I do not know what a date is." "Then it's technically also the best one." She lowered her mouth to his throat, with a tenderness that belonged in cathedrals, and bit. The world did not close like a door. The world detonated. Her essence poured into him, cold starlight flooding the channels the venom had burned open, and the Vashkar met it and changed. He felt the two forces collide in his blood, felt them spiral around each other like binary stars, felt something ancient and structural lock into place with a sound that wasn't a sound. A chord struck on the instrument of his bones. Light erupted from the point of her bite, violet and blinding, and through it he heard her gasp against his skin, heard it twice, once with his ears and once from somewhere behind his own heart. She tore away from him and staggered back, a hand pressed to her mouth, her moon eyes enormous. "No," she breathed. "No, that is not possible. That ritual is dead. We burned it out of ourselves 1,000 years ago." Theodore sat up. He noticed, in order, that sitting up was something he could do, that the fire in his veins was gone, replaced by a low violet hum, like a plucked string refusing to go silent, and that he could feel her panic. Not observe it, feel it. A second pulse of emotion running beside his own, hers, unmistakably hers, spilling across some new channel that connected the place behind his ribs to the place behind hers. "Okay," he said slowly. "Two questions. One, am I alive? Two, why can I feel you freaking out inside my chest? Follow-up third question, why is my neck glowing?" It was. A mark spiraled up from his collarbone, a delicate violet helix, luminous under the skin in a pattern that matched, he realized with a lurch, the carvings on the walls, the processions, the vessels held to throats, the venom. She was pacing now, robes swirling, ears flat. "Your poisoned blood," the Vashkar reacted with my essence. "It should have killed you faster. Instead it braided us. The soul tether. The old binding, the forbidden binding." She stopped and looked at him with something between horror and awe. "I meant to give you a kind death, human, and instead I have chained your heartbeat to mine." Theodore considered this. "So, just to be clear," he said, "does this make us married?" Her ears shot upright. "It does not. Because where I'm from, glowing matching soul marks is pretty much a proposal." "I will bite you again," she said, "properly this time." "You'd feel it too now, though, wouldn't you?" The silence that followed told him he was right, and the flicker of fury embarrassment that crossed the tether told him she knew he knew. Somewhere in his earpiece, Merritt made a sound suspiciously like a recording being saved for posterity. "I am Nova," she said at last, with the weary dignity of someone accepting a disaster by name. "And you have no idea what is now coming for us both." Far from Veyra, on a world that had never known a sun, the necropolis of Ficition hung inside a hollow moon like a chandelier in a locked room. Its towers were grown, not built, crystal coaxed upward over millennia, humming with the stored essence of 10,000 generations. In the highest spire, 7 elders sat in a circle they had not broken in 3 centuries, drinking silence the way other beings drank wine. At the moment Nova's teeth closed on a dying human's throat, every crystal in the necropolis rang at once. The eldest opened her eyes for the first time in a decade. The sound was unmistakable, a chord no one living had ever heard, but every Veilith knew in their marrow, the way a body knows falling. A tether, a soul tether blazing to life across the void like a scream written in light. "Impossible," whispered one elder. "Heresy," corrected another. The eldest said nothing. She simply raised one hand, and in the darkness below the spire, something that had been asleep for 900 years opened 6 pale eyes. The pale hunt was waking. Back on Veyra, Theodore was discovering that his new life came with terms and conditions nobody had asked him to sign. "Let me summarize," Merritt said, as Theodore hauled crates of temple salvage up the ramp of the marginal prophet while Nova stood in the airlock radiating disapproval he could feel in his teeth. "You went into the temple with a debt problem and came out with a debt problem, a glowing neck and a wife." "Not a wife, not a wife," Nova said, at exactly the same moment from 30 meters away, with no earpiece. Theodore stopped. "You heard that. I hear everything you feel loudly enough." She touched her temple, ears twitching in irritation. "Your mind is very loud. It is like living above a tavern." They tested the tether's rules that first night out of necessity, because the tether, it turned out, enforced them personally. Emotions crossed the channel constantly. His anxiety made her pace. Her grief, old and quiet as sediment, sat in his chest like weather. When she finally slept, folded into the corner of the cargo hold with the stillness of a statue, Theodore dreamed of crystal towers and a voice like the eldest saying a name that wasn't his, and woke up knowing it was her dream, and that she was now, unavoidably, having his. At breakfast she stared at him over a cup of recycled water with an expression usually reserved for crime scenes. "You dream," she said, "of arriving at debt negotiations without garments. Everyone has that dream. Grigor was there. He had your kidneys in a jar. You attempted to haggle for them. That's just realism. The distance rule they discovered the hard way, at a fuel depot on the edge of the Veyra system, when Theodore spotted a relic dealer's kiosk and reasoned, in the flawless logic of a man who owed money, that he could quietly sell the temple diadem and be back before Nova finished glaring at the depot's security drones. He made it 400 meters. The tether's snap was not pain exactly. It was subtraction. The universe removed the floor, the light, and most of his blood pressure, all at once, and he woke up face down in his own cargo hold with Nova standing over him, one ear crooked at an angle he was beginning to recognize as I have been proven correct and am enjoying it. 3 kilometers, she said. The old text said the tether shortens when it is young. It appears we are a very young tether. You collapsed too, he croaked. I felt it. I sat down, she said with dignity abruptly. But that night, while Theodore charted a course to anywhere but here, Nova stood at the viewport watching Veyra shrink to a coal, and what leaked across the tether from her side was not dignity. It was dread, old, informed, specific dread, the kind that knew names and faces. He came and stood beside her and for once didn't fill the silence. They will have heard it, she said finally. The bonding. It rings across the essence weave like a bell. The elders forbade the tether 1,000 years ago, the last pair to bond, the songs say, cracked a moon with their grief when one was executed. The coven will not send a warning. They will not send diplomats. Her reflection's eyes glowed against the stars. They will send the pale hunt, trackers who sleep between hunts because nothing has ever escaped them long enough to make waking worthwhile. They can follow a heartbeat across light years. Good news there, Theodore said. My heart's currently sharing an address with yours, so they'll only need to make one trip. Efficient. They'll appreciate that. Nova turned to stare at him. Across the tether, unwillingly, something flickered that was not dread, a small, appalled spark of amusement, quickly smothered. There, Theodore said, pointing at her. Felt that, you laughed. I did not. Internally, I have receipts now. That's the thing about this channel, it works both. I am going to sleep, Nova announced, and I am going to dream of silence. She didn't. She dreamed of the pantsless negotiation again and in the morning refused to discuss it, but her left ear twitched all through breakfast, and Theodore, wisely for once, said nothing at all. The galaxy, it turned out, was on fire, and had been for some time. The conquered wars had begun over something nobody could quite remember, a border, a blockade, an ambassador's insult, depending on which propaganda feed you subscribed to, and had metastasized into the kind of conflict that no longer had sides so much as directions. The marginal prophet threaded through it like a moth through a burning house, transponder spoofed, running dark past the wreck fields where warships drifted gutted and glittering, shedding frozen atmosphere like breath on a cold morning. Checkpoint ahead, Merritt announced. Conquered loyalists, or separatists, possibly pirates wearing loyalist insignia. The war has become very casual about branding. Spoof us as a grain hauler. We are shaped nothing like a grain hauler. Then a very sick grain hauler. They needed fuel, and fuel meant Skelethra Station, a smuggler port built into the fossilized carcass of a void leviathan, a creature so vast that 3 centuries of colonization had only reached its 3rd rib. Docking bays nestled between vertebrae the size of cathedrals. The whole station smelled faintly of petrified time, and the locals swore the bones still dreamed, and that if you slept too close to the skull, you woke up speaking languages that hadn't been invented yet. Nova drew stairs the moment they stepped off the ramp, a Veylith, hooded, moving through the crowd like a rumor. Theodore drew stairs because he was arguing with his own earpiece about whether collateral was a strong word for the diadem he was about to pawn. The fuel broker was a 4-armed Ossian named Vec who examined the diadem, examined Nova, and pushed the diadem back across the counter. Not touching temple salvage from Veyra. Words out. Someone's paying for information on anything that came off that rock recently. Vec's eyes slid meaningfully to Nova's hood. Someone pale. Someone who asks questions with too many teeth. Fuel's free if you leave in the next hour and forget my name. Vec, Theodore said. I forgot it already. That's the kind of professional I am. They were airborne in 40 minutes, and it was in the long dark after, the deep transit between stars, where there was nothing to do but exist in a hull's worth of shared space, that the tether began doing its real work. Not the dramatic parts, the quiet ones. Theodore learned that Nova hummed when she repaired things, a three-toned harmony her throat produced without her permission, and that she was 412 years old, and that in all those years no one had touched her without ceremony, a formal request, a ritual reply, gloves. He stopped tossing her tools and started handing them, and the first time their fingers overlapped on a hydrospanner, the jolt that crossed the tether from her side was so bright and so startled that he dropped the spanner on his own foot. She, in turn, learned that Theodore had been trusted with precisely nothing in 31 years, not by the orbital slum that raised him, not by the crews that hired him, not even by Grigor, who trusted only Theodore's fear. She learned it not from his words, which deflected everything, but from the tether, which deflected nothing. He joked the way other men wore armor. Neither of them said any of this aloud. That was the comedy of it. Two beings sharing an emotional channel with the bandwidth of a star, pretending across the breakfast table that the weather in their chests was strictly their own business. The denial reached such structural magnificence that Merritt began, unprompted, piping slow-tempo Ossian love ballads into the cabin. Merritt, ambient acoustic optimization. Merritt, studies show music reduces interpersonal tension. I will disconnect you. You cannot, Merritt said serenely. You feel too much now, I've run the numbers. They were both still threatening the console when the proximity alarm went off, not the polite chime of traffic, but the long falling tone that meant something had emerged from the dark already inside their engagement envelope. The sensor screen showed it, a vessel like a sliver of bone, running no lights, no transponder, no heat. Just 6 pale points on the hull that Theodore's instruments insisted were windows and Nova's flattened ears insisted were eyes. They found the heartbeat, she whispered. What followed was 4 minutes Theodore would remember in fragments. The Prophet screaming through a wreck field with the bone chip flowing after them like something poured. Nova at the airlock with a blade in her hand, silver-white, grown not forged, older than human writing. The boarding lance punching through the hull. The hunter that came through the breach, tall and eyeless and wrong, moving like a deleted frame. Nova met it in the corridor, and the fight was 2 kinds of silence colliding. And when the Prophet finally tore free and the hunter fell back into the void trailing frost, her blade went with it, buried to the hilt in the creature's shoulder. She stood at the sealed breach for a long time afterward, hand pressed to the cold metal. Nova. That blade held my mother's essence, she said quietly. It was all of her I had left. Across the tether, Theodore felt the exact size and shape of the loss, and for once in his life offered no joke at all, only his hand, no ceremony, no gloves. After a moment, cool violet fingers closed around it. They went aground on Marrowville, a monsoon world where the rain had not stopped in recorded history, and the settlements grew on stilts above a sea the color of old bruises. It was the kind of planet where nobody asked questions, because the rain drowned out the answers anyway, and the marginal prophet sat in a rented hangar dripping like everything else, wearing a fresh transponder identity that Merritt had christened, over Theodore's objections, the happily married. It took Theodore 3 days to notice Nova was dying. That was the trick of her stillness. She had 4 centuries of practice at making weakness look like poise. But the tether kept no secrets, and what leaked across it now was a slow dimming, a gray tide rising, and on the 3rd night he woke to find her essence glow guttering like a candle in a draught, the violet of her skin gone ashen, her twin moon eyes down to crescents. You need to feed, he said. I need, Nova said from her corner with the composure of a collapsing cathedral, nothing. Merritt, what happens to a Valeth who doesn't feed? Fascinating question. According to the temple records you stole. Salvaged. The tether requires periodic renewal. Essence flows both ways. If she refuses, the bond begins consuming her own reserves. The texts describe it poetically as the lamp drinking its own oil. The texts also note the process is fatal, which they describe as the lamp going out, because ancient Veilith scholars apparently believed metaphors improved with repetition. Theodore sat down across from her on the deck plating. Outside, the rain played the hull like a drum with infinite patience. So the options are, you bite me or the lamp goes out. You do not understand what a second bite means. Her ears were flat but not in anger, in something closer to fear, and the tether confirmed it, cold and coiled. The first bite forged the tether. A second deepens it, permanently. The channel widens. The old texts say the second bite opens the blood's memory. Everything I am pours into you, everything you are pours into me. There is no privacy after. There is no distance after. I have already stolen your death, human. I will not steal the rest of you. Stolen. Theodore let the word sit between them. That's what you think happened in the temple. That is what happened. Funny, from inside my body it looked a lot like saving. He rolled up his sleeve, an offering, an argument, both. Here's the thing you keep missing, Nova, because you're 400 years old and apparently still bad at this. You didn't take anything from me. I was a dead man crawling in the dark, and everything since, every day of this ridiculous, terrifying, occasionally musical fugitive life, has been extra, bonus material. And I've spent it with the first person in 31 years who looks at me like I'm worth more than what I can carry. He held out his arm. So take, I'm offering. That's the whole difference, isn't it, between stealing and being given something. Her eyes rose to his, guttering moons, and across the tether he felt the exact moment her resistance cracked, not defeat, but permission, granted at last to herself. It will hurt me more than you, she whispered. Then we'll split it. Apparently that's a thing we do now. The second bite was nothing like the first. The first had been detonation. This was flood. The channel between them tore wide, and the blood's memory came through in both directions, and Theodore stopped being only Theodore for a while. He stood in crystal towers under no sun. He felt 400 years of ceremony and distance, of touch rationed like water in a desert. He watched a sister, laughing, reckless, ears always crooked with mischief, dragged before 7 silent elders, and he felt the word exile fall like a blade, and understood that Nova had not left her people. She had been subtracted from them, for the crime of asking why the old bindings were forbidden. He felt centuries alone in a dead temple, keeping vigil over carvings of a joy her species had amputated from itself. And Nova fell through him in return. Orbital slums stacked like crates around a dying station core. A boy learning to count his worth in salvage tonnage, learning that jokes made hard men hesitate, learning that no one comes back for you, so travel light. She felt the precise weight of 31 years of being handed nothing and expected to be grateful, and she understood, finally, why he had offered his arm as though it cost him nothing. It was the only thing anyone had ever let him give. When the world reassembled, they were both on the deck, foreheads nearly touching, the tether between them no longer a channel but a confluence. Her glow had returned, deep and steady. Neither of them moved for a long time. Your sister, Theodore said hoarsely. Her ears did the thing, the crooked thing, when she lied to the elders to protect you. Yes, yours does it too, left ear every time. A pause rich with catastrophe. It does not. Nova, I have literally seen your childhood. The memory is corrupted. You're doing it right now. I am going to check the perimeter, Nova announced, rising with immense dignity, left ear at 45 degrees, and Theodore lay back on the deck plating of the happily married and laughed until the rain seemed to join in. The refugee flotilla called itself the Long Walk, though it had not walked anywhere in 11 years. 600 vessels lashed together with cable and hope, drifting through neutral space like a city that had lost an argument with geography. Freighters, liners, grain barges, one decommissioned warship with flowers painted over its gun ports. 40,000 people from a dozen burned worlds, and every one of them had learned not to ask where anyone came from, which made it, in Theodore's professional opinion, the perfect place to hide. We're two fugitives with matching neck tattoos and an AI that hums wedding marches, he said, guiding the happily married into a berth between a barge and a chapel ship. We'll blend right in. They did for 9 days. 9 days of Nova helping the flotilla's medics. Her essence touch could quiet the screaming nightmares the war left in people. A talent that spread through the long walk by word of mouth until there was a queue outside their berth every morning. And 9 days of Theodore fixing water reclaimers and teaching a gang of refugee children how to cheat at cards, on the grounds that the galaxy would cheat them first and they deserved a head start. On the 10th day, the bone ships came. There were 3 this time, sliding out of the dark on the flotilla's blind side, and there was no chase because the long walk could not run. The pale hunt boarded through the outer barges, and they were not careful because to the hunt, the 40,000 were merely the haystack. They'll carve through the whole flotilla to reach us, Nova said. Her new blade, plain ship steel, Theodore's, gifted without ceremony, was already in her hand. Unless we go to them. Or, Theodore said, counterpoint, we go to them but with a plan. You do not have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan. You have a sentence you have not finished. That's what a plan is. They met the hunt in the flotilla's central span, a kilometer of cargo bay strung between 2 freighters, where the refugees grew hydroponic wheat under sun lamps. Of all the absurd and beautiful things, a golden field in a steel box in the void. 6 hunters came through the wheat like frost through glass. And it was there, blade to blade in the false sunlight, that the eldest hunter spoke. The first words anyone had ever recorded from the pale hunt, in a voice like a tomb being opened for inventory. Tether bearer, the elders offer mercy. Submit to the unmaking and the human dies swiftly. Resist, and we are instructed to remind you what your kind did to the moon of S-Cell. There it is, Nova breathed, the old story. The bonded pair who cracked a moon in their grief, the reason for the ban, the monster tale they raised us all on. It is no tale, the hunter said. No, said Nova, and her voice changed, because the second bite had opened the blood's memory, and blood remembers what libraries are made to forget. And among the memories she had inherited from her mother's line, something had been surfacing for days, rising like a wreck from deep water, and it broke the surface now. It is not a tale, but it is a lie. I have the memory, Hunter, I carry it. The pair at S-Cell did not crack the moon in grief. They cracked it holding it together. It was a war moon, a weapon, falling on a world of civilians, and they caught it. They died fusing its fault lines with their own essence. The tether was not banned because bonded pairs are dangerous. Her blade came up. It was banned because they are powerful, and power that flows between 2 people cannot be governed by 7. The wheat stood very still. Even the sun lamps seemed to listen. The elders erased it, Nova said. They took the histories and left us the horror story. 1,000 years of loneliness, Hunter, engineered as policy. For one moment, Theodore would swear to it later. The eldest hunter's 6 pale eyes flickered. Then discipline closed over doubt like ice over water, and the hunt attacked, and the field of wheat became a field of frost and violet fire. What happened next entered the flotilla's legends before the day was out. The hunters were winning. They were made for exactly this. Until one of them, cutting toward Nova's back, carved through a bulkhead brace instead, and 11 meters of cargo spine came down toward the wheat and the 200 refugees who had not run fast enough. Theodore did not decide anything. Neither did Nova. The tether decided, the way a heartbeat decides, and the bond flared, not light exactly, but presence. A storm of violet standing suddenly in the shape of a shield, and the falling steel stopped, held, hung, while 40,000 people's worth of city groaned around it, and every hunter in the wheat froze to watch the thing their masters had taught them, was an atrocity holed up the roof. The hunt withdrew, not defeated, recalled, all six going still at once, listening to something distant then flowing backward into the dark. "That's bad," Theodore panted, on his knees in the crushed wheat, Nova's hand locked in his. "That's them escalating, isn't it?" In Ficition, the eldest stood at the spire's rim, hearing the reports ring through the crystal, and her face was very old and very unreadable. "No more hunts in the dark," she said. "Bring them to the necropolis. The galaxy watched them defy us." Her hands, folded in her sleeves, had begun, very slightly, to tremble. "So the galaxy will watch the unmaking." They did not run. That was the part the ballads would get right. When the summons came, broadcast across the essence weave for every Veilith house and half the listening galaxy to hear, Nova set a course for the hollow moon herself, and Theodore, who had spent his whole life traveling light, packed nothing but the plain steel blade and came with her. "Statistically," Merritt offered as Ficition swallowed them, "walking into your own execution has a success rate of—" "Don't." "One," Merritt finished quietly. "There is exactly one recorded case of it working. S-cell. I thought you'd want to know the precedent exists." The necropolis was a cathedral turned inside out, crystal towers hanging downward into the hollow dark, lit by the stored light of 10,000 generations, and every balcony, every bridge, every singing gallery was full. The elders had wanted witnesses. They received them, every house, every lineage, and beyond the crystal, drifting in the void like moths, hundreds of ships, refugee ships. The long walk had followed, all 600 vessels, flowers over the gun ports, because 40,000 people had watched two fugitives hold up their roof and had apparently decided that was worth a detour. They caged Theodore in a lattice of frozen essence at the chamber's edge, evidence, not participant, and brought Nova before the seven. The rite of unmaking waited at the chamber's heart. A needle of black crystal, humming, hungry, built to drink a tether dry. "Nova, exiled of the ninth house," the eldest said, and her voice filled the hollow moon. "You stand accused of heresy of the blood. Have you words before the unmaking?" "I have memory," Nova said, and she opened the tether. Not to Theodore, through him, and outward, the confluence they had become acting as an amplifier, and the blood's memory poured into the essence weave where every Veilith could taste it. S-cell, the war moon falling. The bonded pair beneath it, not monsters but a shield, fusing fault lines with their own lives while the elders of that age watched, and afterward the erasure, the library's culled, the horror story installed in history's place like a lock on a door. 1,000 years of engineered loneliness, experienced firsthand by 10,000 Veilith in a single crystalline instant. The necropolis rang like a struck bell. Houses turned to houses. Somewhere below, a whole gallery began the three-toned morning harmony, and it spread, and the elders' circle, unbroken for 3 centuries, broke. 5 of the 7 rising in fury or shame, shouting across each other, order coming apart like frost in sunlight. "Enough!" The eldest's voice cracked the chaos. She descended from the circle, and the chamber held its breath as she crossed to Nova, past her, to the needle of black crystal. She stood before the rite of unmaking for a long moment. Then she drew back her sleeve. On her forearm, faded to the ghost of a ghost, a violet helix spiraled, a tether mark, ancient, severed, scarred. "I wrote the ban," the eldest said into the absolute silence. 900 years ago. After they took him from me and I felt the tether cut, I would have burned the concept of love from the universe if I could reach it. I settled for our libraries. Her hand trembled against the black needle. "I told myself I was sparing you all my grief. I see now I only made you share it. 1,000 years of it, distributed evenly. That was my mercy." She turned, and her eyes, dimmer moons, but moons found Nova's. "The rite is annulled. The ban is annulled. Let the record state the eldest was the first heretic and the last coward." The needle cracked from tip to base, and the sound it made falling was smaller than a snapped twig. And Theodore, whose life had once ended on a sound like that, felt this one begin something instead. They did not stay for all of it, the reconvening of houses, the long walk granted harbor in the hollow moon's calm, the first tentative treaty feelers from conquered factions who had heard what a bonded pair did to a falling cargo spine, and were suddenly very interested in psychic healing as a war-ending technology. Nova was appointed to teach the old bindings. She accepted on the condition that attendance be voluntary and ceremonies optional. The eldest's left ear, several witnesses insisted, twitched with amusement. Later, in the quiet of the happily married, Theodore stood at the viewport watching refugee children chase each other down a crystal bridge and took inventory. He had entered a temple owing everything and owning nothing. He now owed nothing. Grigor's debt had been settled by Madame Osk in exchange for exclusive rights to the story. And owned, by his count, one blade returned, one ship, and every heartbeat since Veyra, each one a gift he'd stopped keeping track of, because you only count what you're afraid to lose alone. Nova joined him at the glass, her shoulder against his, no ceremony, no gloves. "The houses are asking what to call us," she said. "A bonded pair, human and Veilith. There is no word. We are the first. We may choose." "I have a suggestion." "No, you don't know what I was going to. Your mind is very loud." "Married," Theodore said anyway, "for the record." Nova watched the children on the bridge, and the stars beyond them, and the whole impossible architecture of a future no one had planned. Her left ear tilted slowly to exactly 45 degrees. "The record," she said, "may state what it likes." She didn't deny it. Across the tether, bright as twin moons rising, she didn't deny it at all. There is a story the children of the long walk tell now, and like all stories that matter, they tell it wrong in the details and right in the heart. They say a dying man was saved by a bite that should have killed him. They say a woman who had been alone for 400 years learned that solitude is not the same as safety. They leave out the debts and the pantsless dreams, because children instinctively understand which parts of a legend are load-bearing. But here is the part the children get exactly right, the part they whisper on the crystal bridges when the sun lamps dim. The poison was never the venom. The poison was older than that. It was the eldest's grief, written into law so that no one would ever hurt the way she had, and so everyone hurt quietly forever instead. It was Theodore's arithmetic, the slum-taught certainty that he was worth what he could carry and nothing more. It was Nova's 4 centuries of gloves and ceremony, of touch rationed like water because wanting had been declared a crime scene. Every one of them had been bitten long before Veyra. Every one of them was already dying of the same lethal, ordinary thing, the belief that being unreachable was the same as being unharmed, and the cure, when it came, was not painless. That is the part worth sitting with. The tether did not ask permission. It flooded every private room. It published every hidden grief. It made 2 people legible to each other whether they were ready or not. And they were not ready. No one ever is, and it saved them anyway. Not because intimacy is gentle, because it is true. So the story ends, as the good ones do, by turning quietly toward whoever is holding it. What is the venom in your veins that you have learned to call normal? Which of your walls did you build as shelter that have since become the whole address? And if someone stepped out of your darkness tonight, someone who could feel everything you have spent years arranging so carefully out of sight, would you call that a catastrophe? Or would you, like a dying man on the floor of an ancient temple, look up at the thing you feared most and find yourself smiling, whispering the only prayer that has ever really worked? "Oh good, I'm not alone." Somewhere out past the wreck fields, a small ship with a ridiculous name drifts between the stars, carrying 2 heartbeats that answer each other like call and echo. The distance between them is now 0. It took a poisoning, an execution, and the collapse of a 1,000-year lie to close it. Yours may be closer than that. Most of them are. The tether, in the end, was never the miracle. It was only the removal of an excuse. The miracle was that when everything hidden became visible, what they found underneath was worth loving. What would they find under yours? We've reached the end of another sci-fi traveler's story, friends. Please hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next story. Goodbye.